Evening and welcome to tonight's session of the Asa Pharma Q&A. I'm sorry for delay. We had some internet issues and some microphone issues, but we are now here. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. So Farming for Nature was set up to inspire and encourage farmers that farm or wish to farm more for nature. And one of the ways we do this is through every year we find exemplary farmers that farm alongside nature. And this Q&A session is a great way to hear from these farmers and find out their tried and tested methods for farming alongside nature, but yet having still a productive farm. So before I go on to tonight's session, I just want to let you know that I will be interviewing the speaker for about half an hour. And then if any of you have any questions, please write these questions into the chat box at the bottom and I'll facilitate these as we go along. If you miss any of this session or you know someone who would like to have seen this session, it will be up on our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. So feel free to share it then. And they're great to, any of the previous Q&A sessions are great to kind of download and listen to while you're out in the field or gardening or on the tractor or whatever. So on to tonight's session, we're delighted to have one of our more recent ambassadors join us, Angus O Coistealbha. Angus runs market gardening in County Galway on 1 acre. And Angus, thank you, welcome and thank you for joining us tonight.
You're very welcome, happy to be here. I was excited all week for doing this, so excuse me everybody for the late start. That was our fault, my fault here in Connemara.
That's no problem, absolutely. Sure, we all have a bit of a fear when it comes to anything technology-wise. Well, I'm projecting there, I do. So Angus, you run a 1 acre market garden. Can you describe your farm and your farming system to us?
It's modeled, I suppose, on a lot of American small scale farmers, which kind of, they farm anything between half an acre and an acre and a half. And they go bigger, of course, but like the one that we're doing is really modeled on those. We grow a lot of crops that have fast days to maturity. That's key, DTM. So everything that we have, we do a lot of successional sowing as well. So there's always something in the ground. So that half acre or acre that you have is very, very productive, and you're always on top of everything is the idea, and you don't allow time to go by without something working for you, as in the soil. And yeah, it's a lovely way to farm. You have a lot of control, and yeah, that's what we're doing. We do restaurants, shops, and we have a roadside shop as well that we use to as outlets.
Great. We'll delve a bit more into the whole kind of system and how you do it, and I mean your routes to market. But you might just start with your own journey onto this particular farm and farming in general.
Sure.
What's your background there, Angus?
Well, I left school at 16, and my father, who was born in 1929, left school at 14. And we're very remote out here, and it's an Irish language speaking community. And in my, well, I'll go forward maybe to my 20s really before delving in on what it was like here in Connemara as a child and as a teenager. But in my 20s, I spent 2 years living in the US, and in my early 20s, right at the beginning, and then in my late 20s, I spent another 2 years living in Australia. It was actually in Australia that I took up permaculture. I was a stonemason by trade, and I learned about permaculture, and I always wanted, and I always want to be outside and to be working that way with my body. And that's kind of where market gardening came in as an option. And we had the land at home. It's only 8 acres, and it's only maybe 1 or 2 acres that are usable. And yeah, I always wanted to come back there. I thought I'd come back and become some kind of somebody who lives off the land only, you know, and wouldn't be somebody who was selling or doing anything like that, only living off the land. And so I thought in Australia I would learn some more skills, maybe some more trades, be able to fix up the home here and then grow vegetables and survive like that and live like that. But I like community and I like people, so it suited then from the beginning to kind of bring people into it. And that's how we started out in 2013. I really started. So it's nearly 10 years. It'll be 10 years. This 1st of March will be the date for a 10-year celebration.
Congratulations. Yeah, excellent. Nice anniversary. And I'm sure there's been many ebbs and flows to that. I mean, your site is quite near the sea. So a lot of people, and it has, you know, it's quite rocky, and some people would consider the land quite poor. So it's quite a challenging site, yet you still managed to overcome that. Can you explain how you have done that?
Well, I actually look abroad for my ideas, maybe, or really I do those 1 acre farms in the US, in Canada, North America, even some in Europe now, since Richard Perkins has brought in a lot of that to Europe, to Northern Europe. They're very inspirational. So I take a lot from them. And I've always used their techniques, and now I've started using the kind of tools that you use on small acreage as well. So again, yes, for sure, our situation, physical, where we are geographically is very difficult. So it's very challenging. We're very, very exposed to southwesterly winds coming in from the coast here in Galway Bay. And our farm is on a slope, or nearly on a hill. And then the whole, from where we are to the sea, which takes about 20 to 30 minutes to walk, that's all opened up. There's no buildings there. There's no houses there. There's nothing there. There's no trees there. South Connemara at least doesn't have trees, you know. So it's very, very opened up, and it's difficult to farm. We've got a lot of green agricultural fencing and posts up, and we protect ourselves from the wind a lot. I use lazy beds or raised beds in my gardening, so that the heavy rainfall that we get here doesn't affect me too much. So my land drains quickly in the spring, and then kind of even in December, we're still harvesting lettuce outside. Depending on the December, if there's a lot of rainfall, we can't. But last year we were harvesting lettuce until the 2nd week of December, and that's mostly, I'd put that down to kind of these raised lazy beds that that don't hold as much water. They allow the water to leave.
So your raised beds, you're not polytunnels, or you're some polytunnels, or?
We've started on polytunnels. Yeah, we've started on polytunnels. We're going to have a lot of polytunnels as we go forward, but from the beginning of this farming that we've been doing here, we haven't been taking advantages of polytunnels. Even the polytunnels, I had to save a lot of money to build the polytunnels that I've built. And I knew very quickly that homemade polytunnels wouldn't work here, you know. So it's just too open. So homemade polytunnels weren't going to work. So we had to invest, and it took us a while to raise capital for that. But I've learned a lot over the last few years in how to farm, and we've got it really tight so that these tunnels will be, and we had a little bit of practice. We had one tunnel that we were renting over the last 3 or 4 years. So that was good practice. That was deep as well. Yeah.
You did a test run. And tell me, from what I understand is you don't produce like hundreds of different crops. You kind of have focused it down to a number, just a number of crops that you work with. And that's your business model on how you kind of remain productive, and the business remains productive. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. I'll be kind of name dropping a little bit now, and that'll be good if there's people that are starting out, which I hope that there are amongst the viewers here tonight. Kind of one of the first people that I was learning a lot from is Curtis Stone in the United States. He's semi-retired now. He doesn't work. He doesn't work in market gardening anymore, but he still teaches. So what I took from him was days to maturity, and how quickly you can get something into the ground and out of the ground, so that you make your money that way, you know. So we grow a lot of fast growing salad crops, and then we grow say radish and turnips and maybe beetroot, and a lot of colorful, small, fast growing roots that the chefs in Galway like. So Galway has a really good restaurant culture. It's well known.
It certainly does, yeah.
And we do serve some of the best restaurants in Galway, and I always wanted to do that, and I knew that this was the way to do it, by growing fast growing radishes and concentrating on a lot of those crops. The restaurants don't buy salads from us, they don't buy lettuce from us, they don't buy spinach from us. We sell those to the shops, to retail, And they are what we make most of our money from, is lettuce, spinach, kale, rocket, microgreens as well. And following Curtis Stone since 2015 or 16, I was always kind of going for microgreens and fast growing lettuces and stuff like this. So that's how we've honed in and done that and made it work on very small acreage. So, you know, it's copying somebody else, you know.
We'll talk about the routes to market in a minute, but I just think it's quite interesting. It seems to me, instead of you as the farmer bending over backwards to supply the restaurant what they want, you're actually saying to the restaurants, this is the best that I can grow in my conditions, and it will be the best food that you can get locally. Is that what you're saying? So you're kind of giving them radishes and whatever. Like, instead of them going, I want 25,000 tomatoes, and you're like, well, that's, you know, it's not going to work quite well for me.
Well, it was hard to win them over. I've been doing this since 2013, and we started really going to restaurants in 15, 16, and they weren't really buying much from us. And then it was Richard Perkins's course down at My Hill Farm in 2018, I think, that he got me to drop a lot of my vegetables. I was doing 40 different vegetables, you know. I was doing parsnips and broccoli and cauliflowers and all of these. They weren't working. Jerusalem artichokes and lots of other things. So also we were having problems with our restaurants because we couldn't supply it for them every week. So they couldn't really depend on us and put it on a menu because we were learning to grow them. They didn't suit our area, our climate, and a lot of other things. They don't really suit a 1 acre garden anyway, you know. They suit 3 or 4 acres, and they suit tractor. You know, that's what they suit. They suit tractor scale and mechanized scale, you know. They don't suit the small scale. So things like parsnips and broccoli, they don't work that well. But slowly, and especially through social media and Instagram and things like this, again, a very good tool when dealing and networking with restaurants, and just over a few short seasons, chefs come and go out of restaurants as well. So they'll go into another restaurant, and they're used to working in these high-end restaurants, so they'll go on to another version of the last restaurant they were in, and they'll give me a call, and I'll be able to do what I can do, you know. And that took a while, you know, that and still, as I say this, and it's so nice to serve the restaurants. Sometimes they make you feel like you're serving them, though. But as well, our main focus is shops and supermarkets. That's really our main focus. So salads, having them all the time on the shelf, delivering 2 or 3 times a week to medium-sized supermarkets.
My dog is having a nightmare in the background. Gus, stop. Shh. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that, but he's barking away. Sorry. That's really interesting, because I'd say something like COVID probably helped you fine-tune who your customers were a bit as well, and the kind of the dependency on other things, you know, what was maybe wasn't core to your business as well, you know. So kind of you were able to, your customer base probably became more fine-tuned with something like COVID, because obviously restaurants closed and a lot of businesses that closed. So your kind of your supermarkets and your farm shop and stuff probably, you know, built up your business as well.
Yeah, farm shop had been opened 2 or 3 years when COVID hit, and farm shop sales have been going down a little bit, mostly because we'd gone into the shops and restaurants. So sorry, I should say shops and supermarkets, really. You know, as we went into these local shops, they didn't need to find us on the side of the road. They had us, you know, where they were going themselves. So our customers had us at hand, like that. And then, it dropped away for a year and a half, the restaurants, but that didn't hurt me much at all, really. One thing that did come from it is a lot of, like, on a small scale as well, you have to do a few different things. So one of the major things we've been doing for the last probably 3 seasons, and it really came in with COVID, is we've been selling plants and selling starts, seedlings. We started with tomatoes. By then, probably this was in 2018, 19, we'd started selling tomatoes. And by then I'd already worked out that tomato for me, with my 1 rented polytunnel far away, wasn't going to work as a staple crop. Like, it wasn't going to work for us. So I'd learned how to make really good tomato starts and how to make really good plants and really healthy plants using good seeds and good compost and giving them the best care. So that came in 2019 and 20, especially with COVID. We were selling a lot of transplants, and we switched from just tomatoes and kind of cucumbers and basil to growing a lot of salads, lettuce and spinach, and put them in 12-cell packs or trays and selling them. And because we didn't have to go through a middleman with that, we were selling them directly out of the roadside shop. That was profitable. And it still is. So every, say, March, April, May, or April, May, June at least, we get a big boost in sales from selling our starts and our tomatoes. And we're good at doing them, and we look after them really carefully as well. So that's a big part.
Interesting.
We do things now, yeah.
So going back to your crops, you don't rotate your crops at all, you were saying, because with you're just 1 acre, you don't really have the space to rotate, or what is it?
Yeah, well, I don't rely on a lot of brassica crops, I suppose, and nor do I rely on a lot of Apiaceae of carrot crops. I do, and I don't grow as much potatoes as we used to. So we do still do a little bit of rotation. So we're very careful with kale, for example, because it's a long time in the ground, and I wouldn't take it out in March or April and then, put in radishes and kohlrabi. So I'm careful with kale. If I did do potatoes, I'd be careful with potatoes. I'd still be careful with carrots. We don't have a lot of success with carrots outside. We hope to grow them in the polytunnels over the next few seasons and do them justice. But outside, we don't have a lot of success with them. But if I was doing carrots, and I've tried it again and again over the last 3 or 4 years, I'd move them from 1 year to the next, and I'd be careful about that family as well. And I suppose they're the 3 main ones.
Okay.
I'd be careful with. I'd be kind of careful with all of those, to be honest. But at the same time, like you're telling me, we do have a really small area. So, there's no point killing yourself trying to, bend over backwards for crops like this. The other big thing that I would be careful about is the onion family. I don't want to get white rotted to my very small garden, because I will have very little choice there. And onions become a big part of our growing system as well. But carrots, potatoes, and the brassicas, apart from the fast-growing root crops, they're not as important.
So presumably, if you're not letting it rest, maybe in the kind of stereotypical way that a lot of people would, then you're relying on your soil being super fertile. So
Yeah.
what is your special formula?
Well, we bring in a lot of we do a lot of composting, Bridget. So we bring in a lot of composting, and it feels like you're really rejuvenating the soil so often that it doesn't feel like you're going to get so much pests and diseases, or at least so much trouble with your rotations. It feels like it over the years anyway, that it's never been hasn't been a problem.
And do you use kind of just plants? Is your compost made within your own gates, or do you bring in manures or?
A little bit of manure, and we bring in a few things, but in fairness, we grew everything that we grew last year was on our own compost. Other years hasn't been like that, but as we kind of improve all the time, last year now it was all our own compost, which is really nice, The new tunnel, when we put it up in midsummer, we did dig up all the soil, put manure down, and then create our beds on top of that. So that was one exception. And usually we do bring in some manure and incorporate it into the compost. And the other thing that we do is we grow a lot of microgreens. So after we chop them at the stems, and microgreens are only growing for 1 week. So that's a lot of compost. We go through maybe 3 bags of Closplan every week to produce these microgreens. And because we're also growing the starts, and if they don't sell, sometimes they don't do that well. And even they come back to us as returns from the shops. We have all this compost coming at us, and we can put that into our field and allow it to break down. We go to one local shop. It's kind of been enough. I wouldn't mind having a second one, but we go to one local shop for their deli scraps. And we take a couple of heavy plastic bags every week, heavy enough only one person can carry them. And we need a better system for that, because they seep out onto the floor of the van and they stink the place up.
Yeah, nice.
So,
And seaweed, is it? Do you bring in your kind of, just because you're quite close to the sea? Do you bring up seaweed? And
used to, we don't anymore. We rely on seaweed dust from Kilkieran, from it's a Canadian owned company. Used to be Irish owned, but it's good. It's seaweed dust that we get a lot of, and we get it for a good rate, and we add that on. We either add it onto the compost or we add it on directly. I prefer now to add it onto the compost, so it kind of goes everywhere. It's easier than adding it directly onto the beds.
And do you compost all your soil, or just where it's needed, or do you kind of keep an eye on what areas of your soil might need it more, or is it just kind of use it throughout?
I kind of like, if something's coming out, there's often compost going on the bed, in between crops. It's seldom now that I'll go and put honestly, I nearly put it in between all the time when I put a new bed, a new succession. If I pull up my spinach or something like that and I put in lettuce outside, I'll nearly straight away I'll put on compost. I don't put on an awful lot, a couple of inches, but enough. It helps a lot with weeds, just to kind of.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, do you feel you kind of have low weed issues and low pest and low disease issues if you get your balance right?
Well, I believe like, you have healthy plants if you have healthy soil, and if you offer enough protection to them as well, they'll be, as in from the wind, they'll be healthier plants. To keep them watered. There's a few little key things to do to keep your plants healthy, and control your slug populations and everything else, because they really go for the plants that are not so healthy. And I'd kind of know my soil a little bit. I'd kind of know to look at it in the spring if it was gonna, maybe as I was putting in the first crop, I'd know if it needed a lot, or and then that's where I'd kind of do a little bit of balancing, I suppose, the first crop of the year. And now we've started doing a lot of green manures as well, so that's helped as well. There's so much going on, like,
I know, I can imagine. I mean, that you've got a very productive farm on the 1 acre. Listen, there's a few questions coming in. Before I move on to them, I'll just ask you a few more questions from my side, and then I'll set free on the crowd here. But you were saying you have a number of customer bases, and I know that people are probably interested in the kind of the routes to market and all that kind of, and we've already spoken, you have a farm shop, supermarkets, you have your restaurants and stuff. This can sound quite labor intensive to some people, but do you find it, how have you managed to manage that, that you're not burning out driving around like a mad joke the whole time? And or do you just find it's really important to meet your customers? So what's your experience on this?
Well, we used to do, so we have the roadside shop now, but now it's kind of honesty. Since COVID came in, it's an honesty shop. So I don't meet the customers so much anymore. Right? I do a lot of social media, Instagram especially, so they kind of know us. We're on the side of the road, and it's a very busy road, and everybody around here lives along this road, and they'll pass us, they see what we're doing, and they trust us, I think. We're not even certified organic, actually, but people know that we have to be organic, and they can see it from the compost being turned in the garden, and often they used to see it with the seaweed coming in the winter of the year. There is a lot of work on it. We don't do CSA, we don't do box schemes on purpose, because of, I find that's too much communication, and you can't be there all the time. If someone can't make it to pick up and they ask, even for them to ask for a half an hour delay might change your course of your day totally, and it's really difficult to not understand that that's just how it works. So for us, being in the shops is much easier, just to be in the shops and to kind of keep those shelves stocked all the time. And we're lucky again that being on the side of the road here, we've got these shops along the road, and we can kind of, we have a delivery person this year, delivery driver for the first time, and she'll get paid more than the other employees. We kind of only have 1 or 2 employees, full time. Then we'd have people kind of coming in on a half rate that want to learn, or their interns or something like this. So she gets paid more than anybody else, and she'll do 8 to 10 hours a week in 2 deliveries. And she's really important to us. So that helps a lot. Yeah, because we do a few different things. You're right. Like it's just, I think the restaurants are probably the trickiest to manage and to, because they're super busy as well. So the chefs, I mean, and it's just very difficult sometimes to manage that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you got to grow the food first and then see if you can move it. So after a few years, after nearly 10 years of building up your customer base, you should be able to move all your vegetables out of 1 acre. It's not that difficult, but sometimes, yeah, it does take a lot of communication and effort on your end. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then I wouldn't be doing my job correctly if I didn't ask, do you see kind of nature responding to the way you farm? Or does nature add much value to your product as well?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we're in a beautiful place. That's my number one thing. That I'm just in one of the most beautiful places in Ireland, I think. And nature is kind of the reason that I want to do this, and being outside all the time, getting my hands into the compost, or all of these things. They're really important. In the way that we make our compost, we probably do use nature is integral to that, and the seasons are integral to that, and our green manuring and everything else, and our seeding, in absolutely everything. The course of the year is the nature, and in terms of birds and the small mammals that live, and the beetles and everything else. To be honest, I'd be so busy these days that I don't see them as much as I should, and trying over the last few years to set us up so that you can kind of stand back from that and see the bigger picture is another goal of mine, at least. But yeah, like I said, we're not a very forested area or anything like that either. So, and it's a tiny acreage. So while I've listened to a lot of the farmers, over the last couple of seasons and years, listening to a lot of the people that are your ambassadors talk, it's a totally different world to where I am, and where we are on our kind of 1 acre,
I think that's the really nice thing, is there's so many different types of farming systems and land types, and ways of doing this, and approaches, and rented or leased or inherited or bought, or do you know what I mean, or farming sectors as well. Okay,
Yeah.
So just going
You
into...
have a great job, Bridget. You have a great job.
I do, I know it. Listen, we'll just go into the crowd here. Julian Gallagher asks, could you explain your experience? What are the biggest changes for permaculture and high nature value farming from a behavioral change perspective? How can we get many more farmers to embrace this?
To embrace growing your own food.
Yeah, and I suppose permaculture, what's your experience of people's kind of, I suppose what are the biggest challenges for permaculture and high nature value, and getting people to embrace this more?
Biggest challenges, I don't know. I think it's getting easier now with social media, I'll say that much. Sometimes it's a little fake and everything else, with people just putting up pictures of their garden and calling it permaculture, and they were doing this and doing that, but don't matter. All that is really like giving people an entry into this world and into this life. So for permaculture, especially, permaculture is amazing. I started with permaculture. I don't practice much permaculture anymore, in the traditional sense of what it is, and it's more, a lot of it is actually more suited to the southern regions, the southern parts of the world, for food forests and things like that. But it's one of the most educational and well thought out and really interesting subjects kind of to start with, and then to become a farmer, or to become someone who lives off the land or works with the land, or works with nature. Permaculture is just like such a gateway. It's like,
just opens your brain to the holistic side of things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So Claire Lyons asks, is it mostly lettuces in your salads, or do you sell other crops as salads?
Oh, cool. Yeah. It's mostly lettuce. So this year, and I'm kind of experimenting with it. This year, we've introduced a couple more lines. Now, this sounds very like capitalist speak, or business speak. But yeah, they're lines. They're basically, I'm growing and selling not just lettuce. I'm selling now oriental greens and winter greens, and it's kind of cool because the winter greens can be half a dozen different salad crops, and we can grow more salad crops. We kind of have more of a range in growing salad crops in the polytunnel, at least in the winter months. So we've got more scope and more choice. With mustards and mizunas and bok choys and mibunas and this and that, we've got more choice in the winter months. So it's nice to give people that choice. And for me, the grower, this gives me more scope as well. So I can kind of, I can add one or two of those to any of those. Lettuce has to be lettuce. Lettuce leaves has to be lettuce leaves. But outside of that, my winter leaves or my oriental leaves can be a little bit different. So if something doesn't work as well as I thought it would when I planted a few months previous, then I can I don't need to rely on it so much. So in the winter of the year, we might have half a dozen different salad crops growing. And beyond that, we can even use baby spinach to put into a salad crop. We grow baby chard on purpose and baby kale on purpose. And it's all about the spacing between them and how many seeds you put in a module. That's how you turn it into a salad crop, how you turn a chard or a kale into a salad crop. And I get great seeds from Johnny's in the US, and I make it work like that because in the US they use a lot of different kind of salads to make. So we don't mix our lettuce and our kind of mustard mizuna. I don't do that like a lot of growers do, and some of them will have loads of chickweed in it, whether they need to or need to or not. But we kind of just do it. We do our lettuce leaves mostly in the summer, and we do a rocket as well. And then kind of when we go into the winter, we'll add a few different ones and we'll change it up, and we do well with that now, even though, well, I've been doing it a very long time, but I've seen other people do it. And as we build our tunnels, I know how well it'll work, We've got these new salad crop kind of lines and new labeling and new bags, and it's exciting, yeah.
Sounds tasty. It's nice that we've moved away from the 90s and iceberg lettuce. Do you know what I mean? That there is that variety available for us from our own country. It's nice. Ronan Diaz, wondering how you control your slug population, organically with ducks or chemically?
I knew that would come up. So I kind of wrote it down. I teach class every Thursday locally, and it comes up over and over again. So I just got this up for Mr. Diaz. I'll get it up here. Excuse me. Okay. So healthy plants. Your start is really important. So you need good seeds. This is really it, I think, at least.
This is for the slug population, or what's this saying?
Absolutely for the slug population.
Okay.
But I'll explain. Slug population has a lot to do with the quality of your crop, the quality of your plants. That's what slug population is. There's a few other little tricks, like there's good housekeeping and keeping the place clear, especially on a small scale. You don't want to give them habitat, you don't want to give them shelter, you don't want to give them long grass and old wood to hide under and this and that. But really, primarily, you want good seeds, you want good compost, and you want to water your plants at the beginning if they're all under your control and you're planting out your crops, all right? So if you start them in the propagation house in the polytunnel or whatever, when you put them out, they need to be at a good size. They need to be hardened off, which means they need to come out of that polytunnel environment, go outside, bring them back inside, put them outside again, bring them back inside, make sure they're ready for the weather that's out there, and then you plant them. And then at the beginning, you give them lots of water, lots of care, make sure that there's shelter in place for them from the beginning. And then you'll get your good crop, and your good crop, and as long as the soil is fertile, your good crop will not have slug pests or any problems, really. Slugs kind of are in nature to break down things as they get weak, and that's kind of what they're there for, and if you can look after your plants, I'll just look at this photo again. Yeah, if you just look after your plants, I did it out for a class last week, so we were talking about it in the class. But really, if you look after your plants, they're going to look after you. So slugs have a role in nature, and they're going to go for the plants if they're not healthy. And I learned that from Jim Cronin in 2014 when we studied under Jim. If you look after your plants, they'll be fine, you know. And don't put, if you're putting out these plants, don't put any weak plants out. This sounds, you know, like a little controlling, but for your own good, don't put out the weak plants. If you don't think that they're going to make it, cull them right there. Don't put them out, because they're only attract snails and slugs, and feeds snails and slugs to get bigger and eventually move on to more difficult plants, you know.
Interesting. A few people have asked, is your system no dig?
No, not exactly. It's not really. We do use a lot of compost and we put it out there. It's not exactly no dig. I don't bring in a lot of compost. I don't bring in trucks of compost and throw it out there. And I don't put it on that thick. So, and I suppose no dig now, if you're putting on the compost, you're putting it on real thick, you'd only do it once a year, like Richard Perkins would do, or like Charles Dowding would do. We kind of put compost on after a crop, you know. Every time that we plant something, we'll put a compost on once again, you know. And we usually do the whole bed at once. So we'll usually plant the whole bed at once, a whole 120-foot long bed at once.
Okay. Darren McKiernan has asked, when does the growing season start in Connemara, and do you use any heat benches or propagation for starting?
Yeah, I do. I use heat benches, and I use under sand cables that I buy from Fruital Farm, or I buy them online, and I get them from England. But yeah, and with a thermometer, so they'll be set just under the sand, and the sand is where a bench that has sand on it is where our starts begin. And they're kind of on it at the beginning for germination, and then they kind of come off it as long as they've germinated. I don't really need that heat so much after they're kind of up. It's really to aid germination. It's not really to protect them or anything like that. So I don't start too early. I kind of start probably the last few weeks of February. I might start, and I might start with like a hardy lettuce variety like Brighton or something like that. And I do my spinach. And then as the months go by, and I'm in no rush, as the months go by, I sow my seeds at the right time, kind of. So throughout March, I wouldn't be, you know, March and April and May, I wouldn't be going all out in February, or even in March. It'll be the second half of March and beyond by the time that the propagation house kind of fills up, you know.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Michelle's asked, how many people are working on your 1 acre farm at any one time?
Not enough. Like sometimes it can be kind of averages about, well, not at any one time, but you know, for the busier parts of the months of the year, maybe 6 or 7 months of the year, it'll be like 5 people. It can be that many. So it'll be a lot. And we didn't used to do long hours. We used to do 6 hours. We've just added an extra hour this year. So we do 7 hours. We have a big long break in the middle, an hour break. About 5 people. It can go up and down, like it can be 3 or 4, and sometimes it can be as many as 7, even though that's unusual these days. But yeah.
Andrew Boulay has asked, when you look at the soil in the spring before first planting, what aspects are you looking at regarding the compost application? Structure, moisture, organisms such as worms? What are you looking at?
Oh, it's a hard one to answer. It's just like I do a lot of things kind of by feel. I don't want compaction. I'm afraid of compaction. I'm afraid when it looks a little bit like dusty, like flour sometimes. Some people like it to look like that, and I kind of get nervous when I see that. So I'm afraid of compaction if I see compaction. And yeah, I don't know, if there's a lot of organic stuff in the ground, then usually the water kind of leaves it, or I don't know. You kind of get used to it, to be honest. I'm not evading the question out of
no, but you've got to know your soil, basically, in your circumstance. Yeah,
you do. I've got a few pictures here that I might, or I should share, but like our soil is black, peaty, very different looking to, you know, a lot of places in the country. Maybe Mayo would have the same soil up there. I'm not sure, but it's a bit different, you know. It's not sandy or really loamy.
So you know what it needs. Roger Hearn has asked, regarding winter cover crops, how do you terminate yours in spring, and when do you terminate a cover crop before spring plantings?
Yeah, that's a nice question. I I'll terminate it maybe a month before or 3 weeks before, so that, and when I say terminate it, I'll cut it if it's long enough and it'll break down, and I'll cover it in a tarp, and that's it breaking down, and that's the termination, I suppose. But I'll do that 3 weeks, depends on, if it's March, I'll do it kind of, I'll do it earlier, like as in I need more weeks in March than I would in April. It'll break down a lot quicker in the heat of April than it would in March. So I'm thinking about that. And, you know, 3 weeks or something before I need the bed, I'll want to cover it and allow for the sun to hit that tarp and to kind of melt it down, and the, you know, the lack of photosynthesis for it all to break down. And if it's long, if it's dry grass that did well and has a good stand and it's been in there since August or September, we'll say, then I'll have to cut it, and I'll cut it with I've used a few, like I've cut it because we're not digging this bed up. I don't dig it in, you know, like a lot of Americans would, a lot of people on a bigger scale would dig it in. We don't dig it in. So we have to just kind of terminate it in a different kind of way. We don't exactly just drop it, and there's another way of doing it where you kind of drop it and you'll roll it. We don't really do that either. We just kind of, we'll cut it with a strimmer maybe, or if there's not too much of it, we'll cut it with just hand shears, like something that you cut a hedge with, and with shears, and we'll cut it like that quickly. And we don't have to cut it perfectly, but we do want it when it falls to kind of cover the whole soil, not to fall off into the, not to pile up in one space and leave empty kind of, you know, soil, because it's just going to get covered and sit in place. And anyway, yeah, that's kind of how we do it.
Great. And what's your experience with spent mushroom compost?
I've used it once and it wasn't a great experience. So that's kind of why we're trying to do all our own compost. I think maybe had we got really good compost the first time that I tried that, because it cost a lot to bring it in. We got it from Limerick and it cost a lot of money. It cost 400 to bring it up from Limerick, paid for the carriage, and a couple of €100 for the material itself. So because we had to do that, I wasn't going to fly back and get it again. And it didn't work very well, kind of overheated. I don't think it was broken down properly, and we didn't spread it out properly. We just left it there and it kind of overheated a bit more. Could have spread it out a little bit better. We don't have a lot of space, so it had to kind of stay in one corner. If I just spread it out a little better, maybe it would have cooled off and would have been better material. So my experience isn't great. I think if I had got a good version, or if I could still find a good version, that I might then be able to answer the question of, are you no-till? With I am, because I'd probably think about putting compost out altogether in the spring or in the winter and not have to put compost in every time, because that's a lot of work. But we do make really good compost, so kind of feels like it's worth it, you know.
Excellent. Claire Lyons asks, what are the crops you grow into winter and early spring?
Not a lot. Kind of the question that came earlier about the salad is about it, really. We'd grow kale. We'd have kale inside and outside, and we'd have garlic outside. We used to grow overwintering onions, or Japanese onions. We don't really do that anymore outside. With more tunnel space, I might consider doing onions throughout winter, overwintering onions inside, giving me that head start with onions as opposed to onions in the spring only. So I'd have them kind of overwintering and give me about 5 or 6 weeks. I'd like to do that going forward. We don't do it at the moment. What we do at the moment is a lot of Mibuna kind of stuff, you know, Mibuna, tatsoi, spinach, definitely do great spinach in the winter time. We'll have overwintering lettuce like Brighton, and we'd have maybe some chard, and not a great deal, mostly salad crops, believe it or not, mostly salad crops in the winter.
Okay. Ruth Fortune asks, top 3 tools, please, and where do you get them from? Or is it a personal question?
No, that's a great question. That's such an important question. Can I do 5 or 6?
Very well, work away. I'm sure everyone can pick something.
So maybe in terms of hoes, probably a collinear hoe or an onion hoe, like a really nice, delicate, light hoe. And then maybe a stirrup hoe, oscillating hoe that you can have for Fruital Farm. They're about 7 inches wide. You can get 3.5-inch ones as well. And they're great for just going up and down the paths and more than on the bed itself. And then if I was looking for bigger tools, mini tractor kind of tools, if you get me. A tilter, which we haven't bought yet. It's a battery operated. Well, I have actually. I bought one today, but I haven't. It'll be 3 or 4 months before I get it. So I bought a tilter today, and I bought a greens harvester today, a greens cut harvester, and they're very big tools, those two. So it's kind of nice to have them because it's like, it feels like progress. So greens cut harvester is something that cuts salad low to the ground and takes away a lot of work, and a tilter is something that tilts the ground. And yeah, I'm kind of worried that that might change our soil a little bit. That will be heavy on the soil, but it's going to save a lot of labor. One or two other tools, I don't know. Good hoes are really, really important, and getting used to using the hoe is very important. And hoeing every 10 days is important. Oh, and a Jang seeder. We've had Jang seeder for the last 2 years. I started using one down in New Zealand when I was interning with Jody Roebuck at Roebuck Farm, and I used a few other tools, and only this week did I add to the Jang seeder. We've had the Jang seeder for 2 years, and that's a direct seeder. That's like a little scooter that you push in front of you down the bed, and it's amazing. It saves so much time for direct seeding winter manures or green manures, but mostly for radish, rocket, white turnips. Yeah, it's great tool.
I mean, it's in such a labor intensive type of farming system. It's your tools are so important, aren't they, in the kind of the long run. Paul Ryan asks, do you grow oriental or mustards over the summer? If so, are they outside or inside?
That's a great question. I am not. We don't really. We do, or say rocket even. We'll do it in the autumn. Excuse me. I don't grow too many outdoors because of flea beetle in the early part of the year mostly. Then outdoors in the autumn we do a little bit, but the kind of more shoulder seasons for us. So we don't do a lot in high summer. Don't do much. I would probably, if I had the right, because our beds are lazy beds and they're kind of shaped like this, I can't really cover them, and I'd love to cover them with some kind of a hoop and then a netting. And if I did that, I'd cut out flea beetle, and I'd protect them a little bit more from the direct sun, because that strong sunshine probably as well in midsummer just puts them to seed too quickly. So I don't grow as many. But our lettuce does so well, and you know, that's kind of what we aim to do in high summer. So it's nice to kind of work with, do the crops when they do well, and not try to push them into different parts of the year where they're not really suited to, unless you can think of a way of making them work for you.
Interesting. Claire Lyons has said, what compost do you use for propagation and starts?
I use Classman peat-free, Classman peat-free from Fruit Hill Farm, and I use the seeding for my seeding, and I use the potting for my potting.
Okay. Sia Ridden says, do you use mesh or netting for protection against pest and weather? I
use not as much as we used to. Again, yeah, I've answered that kind of with that question that came before the last one, but
yeah,
I don't really so much anymore now. I think I will with the polytunnel. I will start to use thermal fleece a lot in the winter time to help against frosts with our salad crops. I can see that coming, all right. But I don't usually, we struggle with carrots, so I'm just going to grow them inside when I have enough polytunnel space. So I've tried that. I've tried, you know, I've covered my kale, and I've covered cabbages and broccoli over the years and everything else. Yeah, it hasn't really worked that well. It has a little bit to do with the shape of our beds and making that work for us, and it has a lot to do as well with the winds that we get, and because we're in such an open site that I don't really use a lot of protection like that.
You mentioned green netting before, I think, at the beginning of the session for the winds. Yeah, so that you use that. Darren McKiernan has asked, do you notice the difference in nature, wildlife and soil fauna between your 1 acre market garden and the rest of your land or neighbouring land?
Well, see, Connemara is different. We're probably going to have to change. We're going to change to organically certified in the next year and a half, mostly because we're in Tesco now, and the distinction helps a lot in sales. That's the reason. Everybody around here knows that we're organic. So I get asked, are you going to be in, what's it called at all? What's the word? I forget, changeover or something to organic. And when I get asked something like this, I just think about our setting in Connemara and how there's very few people growing around us. There's no farms, it's just up and down rock and water. And it's a totally different place to the other side of the country, and where there's rolling lovely green fields, flat and everything else. And, there's 4 acres in one field, or there's 10 acres in one field, or whatever. Around here, there's 1/4 and 1/3 acres in one field, and that's Connemara, and 1/2 acres. And that's totally different. There's not a lot of things growing around here. There's no real agriculture around here. Nature behaves a lot differently. So there's undulating landscape up and down, lots of rock, lots of water. It's hard to notice the difference because it's just this very varying patchwork of geography. So, like in permaculture, they say that it's different along the edges of something. Well, we're all edge, Connemara.
Okay. There's just a few more questions, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. I recognize that we started a bit late anyway, so we'll just do a few more. Forgive me if this, I think this is a genuine question, but Sean Kelly says, can you use human urine?
Human urine, yeah, human urine. That is a genuine question.
Okay.
Permaculture. Can you use it?
Sorry, I don't know if that's appropriate to ask. Like, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, if it depends on, it's like, how healthy was the animal? How healthy was what was he eating? Was he eating chips and curries, or was he growing salad, eating all salad? I don't know what the man was eating.
You don't have personal experiences. Okay, grand. Rosie Dunn asks, how do you make your compost?
We kind of do, I call it lasagna compost. So we get one item and we spread it out, and we spread it by maybe 3 foot by 6 foot, something like that. And then we'll spread it a couple of inches or a foot at the most. And then we'll add another item or another material, and we'll kind of keep on layering it like that. That's our lasagna compost. And then they will be in this roughly maybe 4 foot by 6 foot pile, and you'd call that a windrow. And we might have half a dozen to a dozen of them down in a row, covered by the same tarp to protect it. But that's what we do, and we use a lot because we have so many microgreens. We bring in a lot of microgreens, and we bring in a lot of our spent composts from different. And then if we're growing a lot of spinach, there'll be spinach in there, and there'll be kale in there, and there'll be a lot of stuff from the garden in there, and then there'll be seaweed in there sometimes, and there'll be even I use sometimes coffee ground from the same place that gives me the deli scraps. And whatever we can put in there, hay, we put hay in there just to kind of balance it out with carbon a little bit. Without being too careful or too technical, we bring it in there, and we put our seaweed dust in there, and that's how we make our compost, and we cover it. And sometimes I use it fresher than it should be used, but yeah, it breaks down pretty quick. It'll break down if we turn it. We don't always turn it, but yeah, we make good compost kind of in spite of ourselves,
A few years experience of it anyway. The question here from Sia Ridden, do you use chicken manure?
No, don't use chicken manure. I was advised against it by the very, very clever Jim Cronin, so I pay attention. I didn't even ask why. Not really.
If Jim says it. Yeah.
It just feels like a little wrong anyway. Doesn't feel like a good idea, So I can see how it might not be a good idea.
Kate Saunders, how would you get rid of flea beetle?
Again, timing, I suppose. You won't really get rid of it if it likes dry conditions, but you won't really get rid of it. So you kind of grow your vegetables around it. It likes brassica family and likes leaves. You can grow radish, and radish is fine. The leaves get eaten, but it's not the leaves that are the crop. The crop is the root, and the root is fine. And then you can grow rocket, and the leaves get eaten, and you can't sell it. You don't really want to eat it sometimes either. Well, you'll eat it, but you know. So kind of work around, find out when the flea beetle lives and thrives, and kind of find out its conditions as well, what it likes, you know, and then work around that. So work backwards from that.
Do you know what, Angus, you've done amazing on your quick fire questions from the crowd, and they're still coming in. So, but I think we could be here for the night, but I'm just going to wrap up with a few questions myself. One is, where would you go about advising another farmer if they want to set up a market garden? What are the main things to consider, and what are the main pitfalls to avoid?
It depends on how serious they are, you see. It all depends on how serious you are. If I was somebody who wants to start, I'd go to Jim Cronin and do his course, you know. Another few things I'll say before the things to avoid and everything else is get yourselves onto podcasts. Listen to a lot of the American podcasts if you're recording this, or if you have pen and paper. Listen to Small Farm Smart with Diego Futter. Listen to, let's see, Chris Blanchard, he's passed away. Listen to Chris Blanchard's past podcast. That's one of the best, the original and best. Listen to, let's see, the No-Till podcast is another really good one. Listen to the Thriving Farmer podcast with Michael Kilpatrick. That's another good one. They're all ways that you can do it. Be careful about investing at the beginning. And the biggest advice, again, is go find a farmer and work for him for a while. That's really it, because you can't really afford to make mistakes. And another thing maybe is make sure that you have the markets around you. And in America, they'll say, if you don't go to where the markets are. That's difficult in Ireland because we're more, I think we'd like to be where we came from in Ireland. We're not like the Americans running around the place. So, and it's a much smaller country. So if you can stay close to home, of course, but be careful. Yeah, try and have a market, because it's difficult to start somewhere and not have the market around you. So it's difficult to create a market. You know, like things are getting easier with organic food and people wanting their local food and that, but still it's difficult. What was the other parts of that question, Bridget?
I suppose the main challenges that you've come across, or things to avoid. Sorry for the.
Things to avoid. Things to avoid.
I think you've kind of covered it.
Well, I don't know.
One thing another question, I suppose it's quite a big question, but I'm sure a lot of people would like to know the answer. Is it economically beneficial to you the way you farm, Angus? Does it work for you?
Oh yeah, like I wouldn't be here if I wasn't making it work. Yeah, it does. It's a lot of hard work, like, but it's totally worth it. You know, it depends. Like I have people working with me and for me, and I can afford to pay them 10 or 15 euro, and that's not great. You know, that's difficult when everybody else is getting up to twice that in certain, you know, things that they do in their life, you know, in certain careers or whatever. But a lot of them aren't happy. So I don't know. I'm pretty happy with what I do. I could do it better, you know. And I haven't made too many mistakes since we began, but I've taken it easy, and I've been lucky in a few things as well. I always had a lot of volunteers coming out to Connemara, and I was always in a good place. My markets were always here before I ever got here. My markets were here, so it's easy. And then because we're on the side of the road, a lot of little things have come together to make this farm work. And I'd love to have 3 or 4 people working for me full time on 20 euros an hour. I'd love that. But it's not really there yet. So kind of it's a mix of learning and the money that you know that you get. And I don't know. I don't know. That's one of the more frustrating things, I suppose. That you know.
I think on the plus side, it sounds like you've created, or you've opened your gates to your community, but you've also maybe created a bit of a community, you know, in a rural setting, which is a very important kind of aspect to probably what you do. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, look, Connemara is a very, very, very beautiful place, and our part of it, especially because of the Irish language that's here and the culture that's here, is an amazing place. So I'm just happy to to be here and to be able to know so many people around me as well, and be a part of a community and be a part of a place. and especially the way the world is going, it's just really nice. And I think any young person that wants to farm should go for it and find their own place and their own, you know.
Yeah, it's doable. It's all doable.
Oh, it's doable. Yeah.
Excellent. Listen, Angus, thank you so much. It's amazing what you've achieved on 1 acre, let's be honest, and and that you continue to achieve. And thanks so much for sharing your knowledge. It sounds like you've been through quite a thorough journey with your farm, and you're getting it to a pretty stable place as to what you produce, and that you're able to share that with others. So thank you so much for that generosity in doing that. If anyone missed any of this session, it will be up on our YouTube site channel by tomorrow. Or if you think anyone else would like to see it, feel free to pass them on the link to that. This is the end of our Q&A session for this month, but we'll be starting again in January with Colin Flynn on the 10th of January. So feel free to join us for our next session. They're every 2 weeks in the normal time of the year without Christmas stuck in the middle. So Angus, thank you so much. Hopefully, maybe we might have a farm walk on your land in the summertime. We'll be back to you anyway. I'm sure we'll hear from you again, and all the incredible stuff you're doing. So thanks for your time, Angus. And thanks to everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
See
everyone.
you next time. Goodbye.
All right, Bridget.
Thank you.